So, good evening, everyone, and warm welcome to St George's Hall. My name's Tim Jones. I'm the Vice-Chancellor here at the University of Liverpool, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 2024 Heseltine Institute Lecture. Now, in the last few years, this event has become an established highlight in the university's calendar. The lecture provides a valuable space to consider the pressing issues facing us as a society and to consider what they mean here. In doing so, the lecture exemplifies the university's commitment to advancing the well-being and prosperity of the Liverpool City region. Tonight's lecture demonstrates this commitment by bringing together the Metro Mayors of Liverpool City region and Greater Manchester to discuss how our city regions can work together at the vanguard of a renewed North and a more equal Britain. And I'm delighted to welcome both Steve Rotherham and Andy Burnham to speak tonight about their recent book, Head North, which sets out a radical and humane vision for the future of our country. The Heseltine Institute has long been a crucial bridge between the university and policymakers at a national as well as a regional and local level. I am particularly grateful to colleagues at the Institute for convening tonight's event and for their continuing role in the University of Liverpool's contribution to policy debate. The Institute is, of course, named after Lord Heseltine and reflects his commitment to enhancing Liverpool's economic, social and political renewal and amplifying the city's voice in national life. And I'm delighted that Lord Heseltine is in the audience tonight, and we are as grateful as always for his ongoing contribution to civic debate here in Liverpool. I'm also delighted to welcome the chair for tonight's conversation, Mairead Smith, back to the University of Liverpool. Mairead studied here between 1997 and 2002, and during this time she was elected as General Secretary of our Guild of Students. She's now a senior reporter and presenter for BBC Northwest Tonight and Politics Northwest. And as someone who spends her time reporting on the key issues impacting our region, she's the ideal host to lead this conversation. 2024 has, of course, been a truly significant political year, with local and mayoral elections, as well as the first change of government in the UK for 14 years at the general election in July. And tonight's event will be an opportunity to learn more about the plans and priorities that Steve and Andy have for their city regions, as well as their ambitions for working effectively with the new government in Westminster. But I hope too that it represents the beginning of a more ambitious discussion about the ways the Liverpool City region and Greater Manchester can work together to deliver a better future for the North West as a whole. I have spoken on several occasions about the potential for Liverpool and Manchester to collaborate more closely. We are geographically very close. There is strong political alignment, and there are strategic areas where working in partnership as opposed to in competition makes perfect sense. For these reasons, I'm delighted that my counterpart at the University of Manchester, Professor Duncan Iverson, joins us tonight as we announce plans for closer collaboration between the universities of Liverpool and Manchester. This commitment includes strengthening joint working between the two universities in research areas such as specialty chemicals, biotechnology, quantum technologies, nuclear research to support the transition to net zero, and the creative industries, which all align to the city region's priorities for growth. The partnership will ensure that the whole region can benefit from its leading research-intensive universities working together, and in doing so, consolidate the status of the Northwest as a fantastic place to invest in. So I look forward to working with Duncan, and of course with Steve and Andy and all our partners across the Northwest to unlock further such opportunities for cross-regional collaboration over the coming years. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Sue Jarvis and I'm co-director of the Heseltine Institute, and on its behalf I'm delighted to welcome you to our third annual lecture. So as the Vice-Chancellor outlined, the Heseltine Institute is an interdisciplinary public policy research institute which brings together academic expertise from across the University of Liverpool with policymakers and practitioners to support the development of sustainable and inclusive cities and city regions. So the themes of this evening's lecture reflect many of our core areas of work, including the future of cities, addressing regional inequalities, English devolution, and connecting policy to people, to practice and place. So we're delighted that Steve Rother and Andy Burnham are here to speak tonight. So just some quick bios. Steve was elected as the first Liverpool City Region Mayor in 2017. And in May 2024, Steve was elected for a third term as Mayor, with pledges to return council house building at scale, to increase foreign direct investment into the region, to build 3 new train stations, and to launch a free pilot of artificial intelligence in local schools. He has also revised the region's net zero target to 2035, which is the most ambitious target for a city region in the country. And Steve first entered politics back in 2002 as a Liverpool City Council councillor. He subsequently held the ceremonial title of Lord Mayor of Liverpool before being elected Member of Parliament for Liverpool Walton in 2010. Also re-elected for a third term in May is Andy Burnham. Andy's priorities for Greater Manchester include continuing to build the London-style integrated transport system, ending the housing crisis by 2038, offering a new technical education as an alternative to university, and creating a Live Well service, making Greater Manchester a great place to grow up, get on and grow old. And before being elected as Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy was MP for Lee from 2001. In the previous government, Andy has held ministerial positions at the Home Office, Department of Health and the Treasury. In 2008, he became Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, before returning to Health as Secretary of State in 2009. And as the VC noted earlier, Steve and Andy have published their book, Head North, A Rallying Cry for a More Equal Britain. So we're delighted to be hosting them in conversation tonight, where they will be discussing their plans to rewire and reimagine our country beyond the Westminster bubble. I'm now going to hand over to Mairead Smith, who will be our host for this evening and will be chairing the conversation between Andy and Steve. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the beautiful St George's Hall. What a wonderful setting to have this conversation tonight. We will be encouraging questions after both Steve and Andy answer a few questions from myself. We just want to bring out what this book means to them, why they wrote it, and why it matters not just to you, but your families and people right across the north of England. So welcome to the stage, Andy Burnham. And Steve Rotherham. Now, the first thing I note is that they didn't bring a beer for me.
How rude.
How rude. Welcome.
I can't believe he bought me one, actually, which is something.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. You two being together, discussing things, your direction, where you want to go. That's why you're here. You've got together years ago, really because of coincidence, and picking out from this book, because of culture. If it hadn't been for where you were in 2008, a lot of your conversations wouldn't have happened. And where you were as well as Lord Mayor of Liverpool, all of that connection, and you've said it as well, Andy, about chance, taking those opportunities, that's made this friendship into something that you hope will change the north of England. I'm going to start with you, Andy. I want to, first of all, talk about John Prescott, how important he was, and why we're doing this. Obviously, he died at the end of last week, and arguably without him, you guys maybe wouldn't be in the positions as mayors of Greater Manchester and the Liverpool City region because of how prevalent he was in pushing for devolution.
No, thank you, Mairead, and thank you everyone for coming tonight. It's wonderful to see this magnificent room so full. We've all been watching John downing a pint, haven't we, on social media in recent days, so maybe it's very much in his honour that we raise a beer to him tonight. For sure, John was somebody who gave the north of England a political profile in the Blair government that it had lacked until that point. And actually, if you were to pluck out another figure, it would be Lord Heseltine before him. Both, I think, did more to advance the cause of the North and English devolution than any other two politicians I can think of, perhaps, to be fair, until George Osborne. And then along come Steve and I. So absolutely, I was in John's campaign team when we were going for regional devolution after the North East. So we were all part of Yes for the North West, which John had lined up for me as a new backbencher. I was a big part of it, and we were all waiting for the North East to give the go-ahead to devolution there. And of course, it never happened, and Yes for the North West fell apart. But while he didn't get exactly what he was proposing, I think what came in the 2010s, I think, was kind of building on the sort of the work that John had done. Big proponent of devolution in a government that, quite frankly, wasn't, if we're talking about devolution to England, and also not focused enough on the north of England, even though it was a Labour government, and I've made that critique before. So, yeah, we're very conscious, Steve and I, that we are, if you like, standing on the shoulders of true political giants, Michael, John, and others. And we left Westminster together. This is what the book describes, because we said, well, we can't just go at this half-heartedly. If we're going to establish devolution in England, we're going to have to give it our all. We're going to have to leave together and build it together. And then hence the book, because we wanted to really explain to everybody what we had done and why we had done it. And hopefully the book lays a foundation, if you like, for devolution to go further and further. I think it's now irreversible. I think it's entrenched. We're talking of an England with devolution deals everywhere now. I really hope we see that in this Parliament. And for us, I think in many ways, what we left Westminster to achieve, I think is pretty much there now. Getting there.
The other theme, really, that runs through the book is Hillsborough. How important it is for both of you, as when you were young men, growing up and seeing that lack of change, that lack of belief and commitment to the families who had fought so hard. And perhaps, arguably, Andy, that difficult day for you at Anfield when you knew that things had to change.
Well, yes. That was the defining moment of not just my political career, but my life. Because, as people might know, I was at the other semi-final on the day of Hillsborough, 19 years old, home from university. And lots of my friends were there at Hillsborough. And Everton had played there the year before, and we'd been in that Leppings Lane end the year before, so we knew how dangerous it was. And, you know, when the story started to emerge when we were at Villa Park, we knew straight away what had happened. But it was life-changing for me then. And, you know, in many ways, it took me from being interested in politics to be quite... I always talk about the word, it kind of radicalised me, but it did actually, because I was at Cambridge, went back to Cambridge from here, and nobody was talking about it there. Or if they were parroting the lies of the newspapers. And it really brought over for me the kind of feeling and the theme of the book that this country is in fact two countries. People live parallel lives here, depending on their background or the part of the country that they live in. And I'll let Steve pick up the story, but you know, it's one of those moments, isn't it? In 2008, I unexpectedly got made Culture Secretary, having been at the opening night of Liverpool Capital of Culture, sitting in the Echo Arena, wishing I was the Culture Secretary and cursing James Pennell, who was currently the Culture Secretary. This is how Westminster is so random. You know, 2 weeks later, I'm sitting in the Treasury, and Gordon Brown rings. You know, Andy, will you do me a favour? Will you go to Culture? Peter's had a problem and he's had to go. I always say Gordon's
Nice
always
way to put it.
talked like a mafia boss, really. You know, he's had a problem. We've had to get rid of him, kind of. And what he was referring to is Peter Hain had made a mistake with his expenses, and I was like. Gordon, a favour. I mean, it's the best thing you've ever had. So I kind of go to culture, wholeheartedly throw myself into the kind of capital of culture year here as culture secretary. And then in April that year, he nudges me at an event, a funeral, in fact, in Liverpool Cathedral, and says, you're going to get an invite to the 20th anniversary. And I remember sitting there, my blood running cold, because I knew everything that meant.
And then, Steve, at that time when you were Lord Mayor of the city, and your journey into politics, you'd become a councillor, and then after that going to Westminster as well. But as Lord Mayor, tapping Andy Burnham on the shoulder that day, you're going to get an invite, and then from there, it's where we are today, how far we've come in terms of achieving that Hillsborough law. It has been included in the first King's speech of the Labour government. What's next for you? Do you feel that there's a good enough momentum to achieve the final outcome?
I'm never satisfied until I've seen the detail of something, and we will push our government every step of the way to ensure that, for instance, there's parity of funding, and that the broad aims of the original bill, which Andy stood up in the House of Commons to move, and I seconded, we want to ensure that that is the one that comes on the statute book. So there's a long way to go. But just going back a step, Marie, because I think the bit that you missed out, because you said about the friendship that we've built, it wasn't always that way, because, you know, we'd sort of bumped into each other because he was Culture Secretary and I was the Lord Mayor, and Liverpool was European Capital of Culture. And we bumped into each other on several occasions, and he'd sort of snubbed me, and I just thought he was an ignorant get. And
you didn't. Now, this wasn't included in the book. You came across as absolutely best mates.
Yeah, we are now. But I said to him one day, I said, you know what? I said, what's wrong with you? And he went, what do you mean? I said, we bumped into each other and all that, and you'd hardly, you know, give us the time of day. I said, we're from the same political background. And he went, are you Labour? And I went, yeah. He went, I thought you were a Lib Dem. Because the Lib Dems were in control in 2008.
I was more narrow-minded and tribal in those days. I've grown up a bit since then. I'm even doing the Heseltine lecture tonight, which the younger me would never have thought I would. So I'm clearly a more rounded person these days.
Yeah. So, and that was obviously then we did get to talk to each other. And again, that serendipity kicked in because, unfortunately, a young lad from Liverpool was killed abroad, and his mum and dad campaigned to get his body back. Because she didn't own the body, it was owned because it was a murder investigation by the authorities. And Andy was involved in that because the lad was an Evertonian. And it ends up that we both go to get invited to this funeral. And that's when I said to him, because I'd spoken to a guy called Peter Houghton, who you'll probably know from the farm, and we'd started to say we need to do something as one last go at trying to get justice for the 96 as it was at the time, 97 now, of course, as we know. And I just said I thought he's, you know, somebody from our political background. He knows the city because he was born not far from where I live now. That might be a good thing for him to do. And as I say, when I tapped him, he just looked at me and he went, oh, I don't know. I said, well, you're going.
He's always like my big brother. He just tells me what to do. You're going, and that's it. But it prompted weeks of agonising for me because I just didn't know what I could do. You know, just to go there for show, and I just said, well, I can't do that. And you know, knowing everything and knowing the truth, even though it wasn't more widely known at that point. I remember my younger brother John just said to me one night, because I kept saying, do I go or do I not go? And he just said, go if you're going to do something for them, but if not, stay away. And by them, he meant the Hillsborough families. So I kind of then, and Michael will remember what this meant, I basically didn't tell anyone in the government I was going. I stood right outside of the collective responsibility. I knew I was going to throw all of my political capital at it, basically. So I kind of already, I'd kind of taken my brother's advice. I was going in that spirit.
Yeah, that did strike me in the book, because I often wonder, could you really have said no?
No.
No, I kind of knew I knew I had to go, but I was trying to work it out in my head how I would go and what I would do in going is what I was trying to do. And I remember, obviously people will probably remember what happened. I can remember coming off the cop that afternoon. I mean, it was in some ways a relief when people started shouting at me, because sometimes, when you're at an event and you know something, and the minute it happened, I just felt a kind of sense of relief. But when I finally came off that afternoon, and was kind of walking to the centenary stand to see the families as they did after the memorial, my phone was ringing incessantly in my pocket. When I finally pulled it out, GB calling, I was like, oh God. And I was wondering, do I answer this? And I won't do his accent again, but it was Gordon. And, Gordon Brown had a side to him that didn't really come over when he was Prime Minister, but you see it maybe more now, just a deep compassion, a real deep humanity about Gordon, which his public persona didn't give off at times. I thought I was going to get the Alex Ferguson hairdryer on the phone, the sort of, what were you doing? Because the government was unpopular at the time and it was struggling. And he just straight away said, I just wanted to thank you for doing that for us today. I said, really? He said, no, he said, I didn't know you were there, but I was so pleased to see you were there. And I said, well, with everything that happened, he said, absolutely. And he goes, he said to me, if there's anything I can do to help you with it. Well, I said, well, there is, Gordon. We've got cabinet in Glasgow tomorrow. We were that unpopular. We started going around the country with cabinet meetings. That's a sure sign when a government's in real trouble. And I said, can I raise it? And like a flash, he said, no. Yes, you can raise it tomorrow.
But isn't the thing that it's very unusual to have something like that as AOB because it's so well scripted. The whole cabinet is planned within an inch of its life.
Absolutely, and I went the next day, and I was wondering still, would he actually bring me in? And he did. Gordon brings me in. I raise it and say, look, we're just going to have to give people the truth. There has to be a disclosure process, and immediately. Some colleagues were arguing against me. I remember just sitting there. It was like I hadn't concentrated on a single word of the cabinet meeting before that point, and here I was hearing people arguing against what I was trying to do. And at the end, Gordon just said, "Well, we've heard the arguments both sides here, but we're going to back Andy on this." And I will never ever forget those words when Gordon said that.
And I think, looking back to that time, obviously I reported it for the news and how important it was and the energy and momentum that they gave to everybody. It really felt that finally steps were being taken to make a change. So we can only hope that further steps will be taken, and there's a lot of responsibility within your own government now, your own party. You need to really make sure that they're listening to you.
Well, I think people can maybe see the story now with even more hindsight, because the pattern of what happened at Hillsborough is constantly being repeated in Northern Ireland. You will know the many issues there that have sort of followed the same pattern. But if we think of contaminated blood, or most recently the postmasters and mistresses, they were made out to be small-time thieves, in the same way that Liverpool supporters were made out to be late, drunk, ticketless, and all of that. So these are tactics that have been used repeatedly, haven't they, over the years? And the Hillsborough story is actually more of a national story, which is in disaster, the state, if you like, gets into victim blaming and starts to shift the burden off itself and onto those who've suffered. And this is what a Hillsborough law is designed to correct. As Steve always says, it's not anymore about Hillsborough, because obviously the processes have run their course there, but it is about changing the country permanently. And it is something, isn't it? It's not about us. This city will change this country permanently when that Hillsborough law gets on the statute book. And just think about what that means tonight, everybody. That is a massive thing, isn't it? It has been too easy to cover up. And no longer will that be possible when there is a legal requirement on people to tell the truth at the first time of asking, a duty of candour on all police and public servants. That is a massive change that this city and its people will have brought about.
Definitely worth an applause. This book, Head North, is not just about the arguments for Hillsborough and for that law to try and change things for everybody beyond Liverpool. It's about power. And you talk about the north-south divide. And whenever I moved to Liverpool in 1997, I hadn't a clue what was being talked about. I didn't understand that north-south divide. I had one of my own in Ireland, where I lived, in a very different way. But understanding that entrenched favouritism that has happened in parts of the south and still continues to happen compared to the north, how do you think you guys being together and working so hard together will help to strengthen not just the northwest but the whole of the north? Steve?
I think people might be surprised that we're still the most politically centralised democracy in the OECD, even with the limited devolution that we've got currently. And we have the most unbalanced economy in the whole of Europe. And there was somebody, it might have been from Liverpool University, we'll check this with Tim later, but somebody took the City of London out of the equation and then compared the UK economy with all of the 50 states in America, and we would become the 51st state. That's how unbalanced our economy is. It's only a strong economy because of London, and that, for me, says everything that's particularly wrong with the country, and that is that for many decades and generations, money is being pumped into one area and it's overheated it, whilst the latent potential of areas in the north has been ignored. And we're not going to be ignored anymore. The whole idea of leaving Westminster, and that was a big decision for us to have made. You know, in all honesty, I could have been the Member of Parliament for Liverpool Walton until he carried me out, because I don't think there's a Tory candidate that could have won there, and none of the other candidates really had much of a chance. And I took the seat from being one of the top 10 safest seats in the country to the number one safest seat. So we had the largest percentage majority in the whole of the UK out of 650 seats. But we did it because, and I probably would have still done it if Andy hadn't have decided to take on the Greater Manchester job. But I did it because I know this area, and I know the people in this area, and I know the potential of this area. And all it needed is somebody to unlock it. And when we first got the devolution agreements, which, in all honesty, they're not brilliant, but I think it was Phil Redmond who first said this to me. He said, Scousers learn to read between the lines before they can read words. And I've read our devolution agreement, and it tells us lots of things prescriptively that we have to do, but nowhere does it say things that we shouldn't do. So we've been doing them. I'm waiting for the government to say, what are you doing? You can't do that. And they've never done it. And I'll give you an example. Spoke to Lord Heseltine about the River Mersey. The River Mersey was biologically dead in the 80s. Lord Heseltine kicked off a thing called the Mersey Basin Campaign. The River Mersey is the cleanest it's been, and people look at it and think, clean? Well, it's a silt because it's tidal, it's full of silt, the water. But ecologically, it's the best it's ever been. And I think those things came about because somebody said, this is what we're going to do to tidy that up, to clean it up. And I asked Lord Heseltine, he said, to tell you the truth, I didn't really have the power. I just told people that I was going to do it. And because I said I was going to do it, then people said, well, he's in government and he might well do it, so we better change. And people got behind the campaign. And it's the same as what we've done now, you know, about the campaign now to ensure that untreated discharges are eradicated, banned, stopped from that beautiful river that we have, which is the lifeblood of our fortunes. And that's what we will do.
What do you think is, apart from that, the most successful change that you've made here?
I suppose the most visible manifestation of everything that you do is something that you can see and point to. and that would be public transport. You know, brand new trains, £500 million worth of brand new trains that are the most accessible in the whole country. So if you've got a disability, it's our stations and our trains that you want to go to. 70% of our stations are accessible, which means that, you know, nearly a third aren't, but we'll sort that out. Whereas I think in London it was 20% that are accessible, and ours is the highest percentage of accessibility in the whole country. So we're giving independence back to people. But in all honesty, it's something that Andy sort of touches on in the book that nobody will probably ever recognise, and that is that we had to change the way in which Liverpool and the city region were perceived in Westminster.
Yeah. I'm going to say this because it's easier for
terrible.
me to say than him in some ways. But I think my friend, my closest, best friend in politics has done more to change the political culture of this city region than I think, in my view, anybody before him. We took a decision, both of us, to stand together as the North West, which was a risk in some ways to both of us because of some of the parochial things that come out of that, or, you know, and obviously me being born in Liverpool, Mayor of Greater Manchester, there are always risks there. But he's
actually half Scouse, half Mancunian. So half of them want to get pissed, but the Mancunian won't pay.
I'm not sure what I can say about that.
It must be true.
It must be true. But if you think about some of the things that have held this, I would say this city back, you've taken on some of the dysfunctional nature of Liverpool politics, and I'm just going to say it as it is, and it needed to be confronted and changed, and he's done that. And I think if you look at the position of the city region today, working with ours, it's stronger than it's ever been. Certainly in my lifetime, I would say, and I think he deserves real credit for bringing about that change.
What happens when you two are done? Because, you know, it depends
Dead.
so much. Not dead, just, you know, retired, perhaps.
It's kind of why we've written the book, isn't it? Because we do talk about our grandchildren and people coming after us. We're kind of trying to say, look, you know, we've put something down here that, you know, needs to be sort of built on and, you know, never reversed, as I say. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to say that the position of the north of England in the 20th century was completely unacceptable. You know, people living here were often treated as second-class citizens. That's the way the country has sort of operated, and we kind of must never ever allow that again. You know, through what we began in the early days, you know, I think we did give the north of England a louder voice than it had in recent times. And I think the dynamic has changed a bit now between Westminster and the regions. I don't think it's fully complete, but that's what we're doing. You know, I think the thing, if you look back through time, as Steve was saying, the North has got things almost by luck rather than because it was kind of ordained from a centralised political system. So Michael took the decision to protect the Albert Dock. You know, but it was just a lucky thing that he was in that position and, you know, took that role seriously. And then, you know, in some ways it was luck, wasn't it, that we came together in 2008. And I guess what we're working towards is, what we're saying in the book is, this, what we've done together, and if we see other mayors around the country now, is changing things, but it's nowhere near enough. I mean, this is the big message of the book. It's nowhere near enough. We believe there needs to be a radical rewiring of the country to break that London-centric, centralised sort of hold that there has been. So we are saying yes, devolution, and there's an English devolution bill coming, and that's great. But we are also saying a written constitution, what we call a British basic law. Germany has a law that in its constitution that requires equivalent living standards between the 16 Länder of Germany. Now, if you think about that, we had a hand in shaping post-war Germany, And we had a hand in creating the most levelled up country on earth. Just sadly, it's not our own country, because ours is almost the opposite of Germany. You know, you can see the effect of that German basic law. If you visit Germany, you go into any of their cities, and it broadly feels the same, doesn't it? The transport, the kind of the civic realm, the quality of the place. Whereas here, that is absolutely not the case. If there had been a British basic law in the post-war period, Liverpool would certainly have a tram system. Manchester most likely would have an underground system. The country would be fundamentally different than it is right now. And look at where we've got to with HS2. You know,
not very far. Arguably.
That's going to become a monument, if we're not careful, to everything that is wrong about this country. Because what you will have is 21st century infrastructure in the south, with HS1, the Elizabeth line, HS2 coming up to Birmingham, and then it stops there, and everything north of there is old Victorian infrastructure. It will basically say how it will be it will be a tangible sort of monument to how the country has been run. So we feel we've made a start, but you need, I would say, proportional representation to the Commons. You need an elected Senate of the Nations and Regions to replace the Lords. You know, this rewiring has to be done in a very fundamental way, I would say.
Well, if you think back in 2008, you know, that's almost 20 years ago, give or take 4. But in those next 14 years, you would like to see arguably a lot more change, so that whenever you guys are no longer in your positions, that there are mayors that are as strong and as committed to working together as you two. So how can you ensure that that legacy continues?
Well, the first thing is the genie's out the bottle, so we're not going to turn the clock back. There's no way that we're going to revert to what we had pre-2017. And the way in which you do it is by bringing people together. It's about collaboration and partnerships, and I think Tim referred to it in his address, that the two great universities, University of Liverpool and University of Manchester, and ourselves, we're going to do something to ensure that there's something embedded, whether the the Vice Chancellor's there or not, in the future, and whether we're in our positions or not. But there's definitely closer collaboration that's needed. And look, if you go abroad, it depends where you go. But if you go to like the States in America, Liverpool is genuinely the best brand that you could possibly have because of obvious reasons, historical ones. But if we go somewhere together, and it's Liverpool and Manchester and the Northwest basically, the scale of the investment opportunities are what really attracts people to come to speak to us. And that's where, working in collaboration, we can really hopefully help for that to pay dividends, because Manchester's done all right for FDI, foreign direct investment. We haven't. But we've got assets such as a port and a western facing port that Manchester haven't. And so there's an idea that we've come up with. Andy worked on this first with a mayor called Kim. What's Kim's second name?
McGuinness.
Kim McGuinness, up in the northeast, and they met with Brendan Foster, and instead of calling it Northern Powerhouse Rail, which has never really took off, and it was HS3 if you remember, and then it was Crossrail for the north, and all. So we think that it should be called, because they've got the Great North Run and the Great North. So we want to call this collaboration now the Great North. And so Great North Rail will be that west-east connectivity. I think that then starts to make coherence and sense to people when you speak about it. And all the mayors in the north were saying, if we were to get together in America, because we've just been out to Boston and New York, and honestly, it was just staggering, the reception we got. Andy was in New York and somewhere else, and other mayors have been all over the States. But if they do their individual things, and then we all met up in South by Southwest in Texas, it's March, isn't it, the end of March next year, then we represent 17 million people. And that is hugely attractive, because then we've got something of everything across the whole Northern Corridor.
To be fair, George Osborne's vision of the Northern Powerhouse was always the right one. Bring the North closer together by improving the connectivity between the big cities, and therefore it can punch its weight more. And I bet I'm speaking to the converted here, but there's one thing he and I have got to do before we leave office, and that is get a new rail line between Liverpool and Manchester. We have to do that. And we've set up a Liverpool-Manchester Railway Board. It's actually, coincidentally, 200 years since the first Liverpool-Manchester Railway Board was set up in 1824. So history is repeating itself here.
Yeah, but in 5 years, they'd had the Rainhill trial.
And
in 6 years, they'd opened the railway, so no pressure there then.
Just think about that. They set up their board in 1824, and the thing opened in 1829. What has gone wrong with this country that we can't do that, even with all of the progress so-called that we've had? Anyway, I think we might be struggling to get it open for 1829, but we certainly, hopefully it'll be being built by, 2029. Hopefully it'll be being built by 2029. But, that has to, we have to change those. We have to bring these two cities, not just in terms of the relationship closer together, physically closer together.
I think it's covering transport. That is definitely one of the biggest things that comes out from people who are travelling between not just Liverpool and Manchester, but Leeds to Manchester and further east. You just don't want to make that journey. People are then confined to cars and the impact that has on the environment. So I think if you guys manage to do that, I will definitely cheer for you.
We talked about the Rainhill trials nearly 200 years ago. And the time it took the rocket to get from Liverpool to Newcastle is the same time it takes to get from Liverpool to Newcastle today, 200 years later. I mean, surely that says a lot.
Yeah. I'm conscious of the time and to give people who are here tonight the opportunity to ask questions. There is a roving mic somewhere.
Marie, just before you go on to that, because we knew you were coming in here, and it's the Heseltine Institute, and we're updating the book. We're in the process of updating the book, and in this, the hardback copy, we didn't include something which we are now going to include, and if it's okay, I just wanted to read this out because it mentions once or twice somebody who's in the audience. So it's an extract from the paperback version, and it says, in the 80s, one such Tory was sent to Liverpool as the Minister for Merseyside. His name was Michael Heseltine, but people knew him as Tarzan because of his flowing locks and a leopard skin leotard that was hidden under his suit. Although the last bit I might have just imagined. Watching from afar, I could never understand why so many people could even be bothered talking to him. After all, he was sent to the city in the wake of the Toxteth riots. And what did he have in common with people like us? What was it that he was going to do to improve the lives or prospects of any of our people when his boss, the Iron Lady, was wreaking havoc on our communities? The now Lord Heseltine is an interesting character. He was sent to change Liverpool, but Liverpool ended up changing him. He once said in an interview his greatest achievement in politics was the time he spent in our great city and the regeneration which started in the Albert Dock in the city centre and extended to the Garden Festival site to its south. Occasionally, I'd be in the same room as him, but I'd never have ventured to strike up a conversation. He was still in my eyes a Tory first and foremost, one of them. In 2012, Michael Heseltine was awarded Liverpool's greatest honour and given the freedom of the city at an event in Liverpool Town Hall. He said that Liverpool's transformation had brought tears to his eyes. In an interview a few years ago, he had some positive things to say about the job that I was doing. And when asked by the interviewer whether he'd ever returned to frontline politics, he said, with a wry smile on his face, that the only job he would be interested in returning for was the role of the Metro Mayor of the Liverpool City region. I texted him, "Hands off my job, Heza," I wrote. His response was as dry as it was genius. He wrote, "I can assure you that I can foresee no circumstances in which I would allow my name to be put forward for your role. And he added beneath it, you may remember that this is the same assurance I once offered a certain lady.
Excellent. I think we should ask, what do you make of that inclusion in the book?
This is their evening, not mine. I don't want to interfere with what is a fascinating story. I suppose now that you've given me the mic, of course I am. And let's put it on record, I didn't ask for the mic. I mean, Liverpool changed me. I hope I played some part in changing it. But the important thing that, I don't know whether Steve and Andy would agree with this, is how irrelevant party politics is in the debate and discussion about devolution. You know, I think the whole devolution process draws societies, communities together. You can't generate and enthuse and lead a city like this or any other by pretending that you represent a quarter or a half or two-thirds. And that has been one of the privileges of my life, because without any doubt, the most constructive relationships I've had in local government have been with members of the Labour Party. And it never crossed my mind to say, oh, you know, but you're not quite the same as me. And one of the most horrific experiences of my life, in 1981, a member of my party came up to me and said, what are you mucking about there? There are no votes for us there, you know. And I just couldn't believe that a well-meaning citizen could actually feel that helping to save the lives and prosperity of a great city has anything to do with party politics. Anyway, look, you see, you gave me the mic.
Well, Lord Heseltine, I want to assure you that when we came into our roles, we took a vow together, didn't we? That we would operate to a place first rather than party first principle, because you are absolutely right. This only works if you are serious about that. And you recognise that people of all different persuasions may have given you their support at a mayoral election. You have to be place first. But if you operate in that way, something magical starts to happen, doesn't it? Because you feel the strength of the place behind you. If they feel you are trying to be true to it, of course, people won't agree with everything that you say, but if they feel you're operating to that principle, I feel this in Greater Manchester, the place backs you up and your voice starts to get louder because it's backing you up. And that, certainly in the pandemic when we had our difficulties, you know, the place was behind me when I was pointing out some of the unfairnesses in the way we were treated. But the thing about that place first principle is it's based on common ground, isn't it? However we all vote, we all care about the place, don't we? The place where we live, where we're from. You know, we care passionately about the Northwest, both of us, and the places between Liverpool and Manchester and the places between. And that is a kind of unifying, you're starting with something that unifies rather than divides, whereas the common starts with something that divides and separates people in the benches and, you know, looking at each other every day, and it just creates that point-scoring politics that doesn't connect with the public. And there's something really profoundly important about this, that if you start with place first, in divided times, it offers something of a beacon of hope, I think, that you can have politics based on something that unifies rather than something that divides. And I think we do need to keep saying this, that anyone who aspires to these offices, to be mayors of these great English cities, you must operate to that place first principle. To be fair, Andy Street did in the West Midlands, and we got on well with him, didn't we? But it has to be like that. And the minute this becomes another kind of platform for point scoring, you may as well give up and abandon it.
Any other questions? Yes, there's a hand up at the back.
Sort of 1.5 questions. How, Steve, do you sell the Liverpool City region to the inhabitants of St Helens? And probably for you, Andy, I don't know whether it's the same, but I imagine it is, to Wigan. And secondly, and this is probably the key question, you currently really rely on, almost certainly, the handouts from central government. How do you see the city regions becoming more able, if you like, to raise their own funds?
So fiscal devolution, yeah? On the first one, we don't want people to change their identity. Look, this is something that's been ongoing for decades, hasn't it? You know, I remember when Merseyside first came in, and there were people, and there are people now who still believe that they're Lancashire. On our school books, I'm from a little fishing village just over there called Kirby, and on our books we used to have West Lancs County Council. So it takes a long time to change people's attitudes to these, because there are still people who believe that they're from Lancashire. But, and I'll just mention what happened over on the Wirral. Don't forget, on the Wirral, they were so enamoured with Liverpool that they wanted to change the postcode to a CH. So it's been ever thus. You know, if you speak to people in Southport, they don't really associate themselves too much with Liverpool, because, again, they look towards Preston. Anyway, so that's the backdrop to it. But we're not saying that St Helens should be subsumed into a Liverpool City region. I think the problem is that it's got Liverpool City region, and it's not. It's Liverpool City region. It should almost be hyphenated. It's a city region with the city of Liverpool at its heart. And that's why all of these big areas that are doing well, Greater Manchester and West Midlands, you know, with Birmingham in it, or Leeds in West Yorkshire, etc., Newcastle in the northeast, they have a city or more than one city at their core, and then build around. But it's about collaboration. And so if you say to people in St Helens, for instance, and turn the question round, would you rather have decisions made by people from St Helens as part of a city region, or Westminster? Then you'd rather have the Liverpool City region, and that's what we need to sell.
And just on the Wigan point, well, I'm proudly the first English mayor to have put buses back under public control after 4 decades of deregulation. And we've praised Michael a lot tonight, but we're not going to praise the government that he was in for bus deregulation, because I think it was quite damaging, to be honest. And so Wigan was the first area in England to get the B network, or, you know, our new integrated public transport system, with lower fares, newer buses. And this is the interesting thing. The worker bee is the symbol of Manchester. And I thought, when I proposed the name, the B network, whether Wigan might object, or Lee, I know my old area well, Lee, I thought they may object. Nobody did, because I think, you know, we're 50 years of Greater Manchester this year. And without boasting in this city, on this stage, I think Greater Manchester has a degree of sort of cohesion that perhaps others have not had. And I think the public, actually, certainly anyone under 40, is buying into the Greater Manchester identity, and particularly the Manchester identity, because, you know, that is what brings, you know, there's a benefit from being associated. So I think that change will come more and more around the country as devolution takes ever greater hold. On fiscal devolution, absolutely. I feel we're growing currently in Greater Manchester at the moment at a rate that is borderline challenging, unsustainable. You know, we are growing faster than the UK economy, and we have been doing for a number of years now, but also probably faster than our infrastructure is developing. And so it's a risky thing then, isn't it, in terms of the congestion that may come from that, or people's inability to get around. I've been saying to the government, we need more ability to move more quickly rather than waiting for handouts from you at a budget or a spending review. We need to have more money raised ourselves to, get in there and put more buses on, make the trams run later. Decisions that European cities would just take naturally themselves. And the first one, I think we're both interested in this, is a tourist levy or a tourist tax, because that is a common thing to pay in a city in France or Germany, but obviously something we can't currently do. Although Wales is consulting on one, Edinburgh is consulting on one, and we think that's a thing that people would largely accept as a path then towards greater fiscal devolution down the line. So absolutely, I think Greater Manchester is at the point now where we need fiscal devolution. We can't just sort of wait for the budget to be... Because obviously when you wait for Westminster to decide how much money you're getting, they're almost deciding the limit of your ambitions. And we're not prepared to accept that anymore. We'll set our own ambitions, thank you very much, and we'll raise our own money when we need to as well.
And just to conclude on that, St Helens is the first area in the Liverpool City region that will be franchised for buses. So they wouldn't get that, only it's part of a city region.
Tell them what you're going to call your network.
Well, only to wind him up, because he talked about the worker bee, and so theirs is called the B network. So I said to him, I'm going to call ours the A network.
I like it. A for Anfield, perhaps?
He's just copying off the great Everton Football Club, who named their shop in Liverpool 1, the shopping centre, Everton 2. So he's just literally, he's taking a leaf out of the Blues book, I think.
I just wanted to ask you, talking about the growth of Manchester, do you find there's a risk with that as well, as you are continuing to grow, perhaps growing too fast, that young people could be priced out of the city?
Yes, I do obviously worry about that, and it's why, like Steve, we are talking now about building more council homes, social homes, why we're talking about replacing redundant retail space in some of our town centres with new 21st century residential space. We've got an amazing turnaround going on in Stockport, for those of you who know that area. So building homes that are very much built for younger people and affordable to them, because that is a risk. I already hear that people are moving to Manchester and saying they send 20 applications before they get even an interview with a landlord, never mind get a property. So it is absolutely a risk. But also, it's really important that people growing up in the city can find their place in it. The way I describe Manchester right now is that I think young people growing up in one of our 10 boroughs can see the skyscrapers from their bedroom window, but they don't necessarily see a path for themselves to work in those places, and they don't really know what goes on there. And it's why I'm really pleased that our new Vice-Chancellor of the University of Manchester is here this evening. And Duncan Iverson has brought a new, in my view, a freshness of thinking around universities also trying to support a more technical route for young people and looking into the expansion of degree apprenticeships. Because as was said at the start, to me, one of the things that holds the northwest of England back is an obsession with the university route alone when it comes to English education policy. I think you need two equal routes, one academic, one technical, and both can get you to the same destination, which is a degree level qualification if you follow it all the way to the end. There's not one is not better than the other, but we've been sold a thing through our lives that one is better than the other. And we're the embodiment of it. I went to university, Steve didn't. And
All right.
And the thing about that is...
You've got a qualification from Harvard?
It can lead to quite parallel lives and quite a socially divided society. I really am determined that Greater Manchester will be the first to have two equal routes, one academic, one technical, and young people are given support to get to the quality opportunities that we have in our city region, and then the accommodation that they'll be able to afford as a result of that. So for us, that is massive. If we don't fix that, we will end up with skills shortages, and that will be another risk to our growth as a city region. And he has got a degree from Harvard now, so he doesn't need to...
It's a degree now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Didn't I say? Oh, did Andy say he went to Cambridge? I went to construction.
I love it. Obviously, you believe in skills and developing skills of young people in this city region. How is that progressing? Have you got the support from businesses to make sure that that can be delivered?
The difficulty was that whilst I agreed with the Apprenticeship Levy Fund, so it was introduced to tackle the skills shortages that we've got in the UK's economy, the real difficulty was the way it was implemented. And I remember Justin Greening it was, who was at the dispatch box, and the House of Commons was attacked, if you remember, and we were locked down. We were locked into the chamber of the House of Commons, and being the resourceful sort of person I was, I went over and spoke to her, and I'd been selected as the Labour candidate for the Metro Mayor in the Liverpool City region. So I thought, I've got a chance of getting in. And I went over to her and said, if I was lucky enough to be elected, would you want to do something about the apprenticeship levy with us to pilot it? Because my former career was with an organisation called the Learning and Skills Council, and I used to fund apprenticeships, especially in construction. And I did things really innovatively that it wasn't happening in the other parts of the country. And we were churning out more people and getting more people qualified who started courses. So I thought there was something to offer. And then I recently sent the same sort of letter to the 7th Secretary of State because it was like a revolving door a few years ago with the mess that the government were in. And I know that there are things that we can do with apprenticeship levy funding. So at Liverpool's football grounds last week, we announced that we've now hit £7 million of transferred apprenticeship levy funds, the underspends that big companies aren't using. They give it to us, if you like, and we've got 1,200 people through apprenticeships over and above what the government would have done for us. So there are things that we can do so much better, quicker, more nimbly than a monolith like Westminster can do for us. And that just shows you the beauty again of devolution.
You mentioned Justine Greening. Oh, no, definitely applause. Tell everybody what you said to Jacob Rees-Mogg when you had a bit of an exchange with him, didn't you, once about...
Can you really say those words?
I think we can. Michael can cover his ears over. So I'd never been into the chamber of the House of Commons until I was elected. So I didn't know what to expect. And we had an induction programme. I think we were the first to have an induction programme, but it was about an hour. And Jacob Rees-Mogg was getting up, talking about the processes of this austere chamber, and about Hansard, and then about Erskine May. And I thought he was talking about Theresa May's brother, because I didn't know any of this. And anyway, so I said, I raised me, well, you're Bob, as you know, so I indicated, and they brought me in. And I just said, do you provide translation services for people like him so he can understand people like me, Jacob Rees-Mogg? I said, his parents must be so desperately disappointed that he's ended up working in the same place as a brickie from Kirby.
We've had a question on what devolution means in different parts, not just of Liverpool City region, but also in Greater Manchester. Did anybody else want to ask? Yes, gentleman here. A couple of questions. We've one here and a woman down here as well.
There's been mention of enthusing people, but I don't detect any great enthusiasm for the combined authority. I was one of the 23% only who voted in the Metro mayoral elections back in May. And I think, Steve Rotherham, you got about 60% or whatever it was.
70.
70. Thank you. Which of the total electorate is only a very small proportion. And I think one of the reasons is that there's such confusion about the layers of where services are provided. I mean, I don't understand why police and waste and fire don't directly come under you. And as for Halton, I visited Runcorn in the summer and discovered that Mersey travel doesn't appear to extend into that borough, even though it is a constituent member of the combined authority. And to add insult to injury, the 9-minute train journey from Liverpool South Parkway to Runcorn Station, when you look it up on the internet, there are 3 different fares because there are so many different companies that run services on a 6-mile journey. Is it any wonder that people are a bit sceptical and don't really participate on a democratic basis to the fullness that they should?
Well, it was similar sort of turnout for those elections right the way throughout the country, and that says an awful lot about democratic processes. But I can't change that. All I can do is put forward my manifesto, and overwhelmingly I was retained. In fact, I was the only politician in the country who stood in those elections who had an increased majority from the last time. So we must be doing something
now
right.
It's for me to start saying, oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I must be doing something right in the eyes of people. And I think you're confusing a couple of things. So Halton, for instance, are a member of the combined authority, but they are not constituent members of the transport authority. In other words, they don't pay in to the transport levy and therefore can't get the same benefits as the people who do pay into it, which is the other 5. And so that's the reason for that.
Will that change?
We're trying to, we're working with Halton, and I was only talking, I think Andrew's in the audience today, we were talking about this earlier on, that there are ongoing conversations, but we're closer now than we've ever been in having that difficult conversation because they have to find some money to pay into this levy. Now, the others just have to do this because it happens every single year. But for Halton, who are really struggling, in fact, out of the 6 local authorities in our area, they're the ones who are teetering the most after 14 years of austerity. So we need to be a little bit more patient and do that. And just on the fare structure, that's not a Mersey rail train that runs those services. We don't go there. And that's the problem about the rail network in the UK. That's why we need to bring it back into public control and simplify things like fare structures. And that's why we want to take a bigger stake in what we want to do between Liverpool and Manchester, and why we've constituted a board, because we'll have responsibilities for deciding on all of those things. So there is some hope that we can do things better and differently.
Just to add a quick word on it. I understand where you're coming from, and everyone would want a higher turnout. I think we got a slightly higher turnout because I have police, fire, waste, and when you've got more, it makes more sense to people, I think, is what you're saying. And I agree with you about that, but I want for Steve all of those things that Greater Manchester has got. You know, maybe we've got...
But we don't have coterminosity, and that's why...
No, we've got a slightly more symmetrical arrangement with the two... Yes. Yes, that's true. So, Greater Manchester has worked hard at that over a long time, way before me. So Howard Bernstein, we had his memorial recently, who did actually some work in this city, didn't he? He was great, a great man, Howard. Sir Richard Lees and others built that culture and that way of working. And I think I'm lucky that I just get the benefits of that. But if I could just say, in this day and age, even with the lowish turnout that you rightly point to, for anyone to get 68% of the vote, I think that is quite a remarkable thing, and it does speak to that thing about place first and people. For those, I think, because people perceived here that there possibly wasn't much competition, that they didn't expect him to lose. Therefore, the turnout we look in the West Midlands, they had a higher turnout there, where it was perceived to be a much more contested election. But no, I just think we're not going to say it's perfect what we're doing, but I do think it is increasingly becoming understood to be a new part of the British political infrastructure, and is beginning to make real change. When the buses get re-regulated here, I think, like we have experienced with the B network, it brings it through to every person in every street in every community, and that will only build over time, I think.
Thank you. And we have a woman here. Just the lady in the third row.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm from Manchester originally, but I live here, so I've got a lot of interest in both of you guys. I wanted to kind of elaborate on why you sort of went against the government's budget with the £2 bus cap fare, and why you thought it was important to keep that in.
Well, I'm building, as you heard at the start, what I consider a London-style public transport system. And to me, that means low fare, high usage. And the basic thing should be make the fares as low as you possibly can make them to help people and get the behaviour change that you need with people switching from car to public transport. And the difference between Greater Manchester and still here, actually, and the rest of England is we control the fare box. So if more people use the buses in Greater Manchester, the money comes back to transport for Greater Manchester. It doesn't go to the private operators anymore. And therefore, we can recycle that money back into keeping fares low. So we are going to hold really firmly to that vision. And we will take decisions to keep fares as low as possible. London, a single bus journey is £1.75. So, we're not at the London level, but £2 is there or thereabouts. But that's the kind of benefit of re-regulating buses. You can start to, if you get more people using the buses, the money comes back to the city region rather than being lost to the operators.
The Liverpool City Region Treasurer is in the audience tonight, so I'm not going to say anything that makes it seem like it was an easy decision, because it really wasn't. But the random nature of Westminster and the way in which this supposed levelling up funding was distributed meant that Greater Manchester, for instance, in the last round got £96 million of BSIP funding, and we got £12 million. And that's why we, at first, were really scrabbling around trying to see whether we could do what Andy was doing. He was first off, and he said, they've got a franchise bus network, and theirs will be £2. And you can imagine the pressure then that's put on somebody like myself who wanted to do it, because in an area of really low car ownership, public transport is essential. It's not just, nice to have. 82% of journeys, public transport journeys in our city region are by bus. So we had to do something, but we worked really hard and diligently, because we needed to stick to our treasury management rules, and we did that, able to find the money, and then we have said that we will retain the £2 bus cap that we've got, whilst everywhere else other than Greater Manchester will go up to £3, but we'll ensure and guarantee that up until September 2025, and that will be really good for people as we enter into then the first round of franchising our buses.
And it makes sense that, because when Liverpool City Region takes control again of its buses, you're better to do it on a rising tide of passenger usage rather than put the fares up and everyone, it doesn't make sense to do that. It makes sense. We've done this. We put in the £2 cap before we regulated, because then you get people using them, and then the upside comes to you. And then you've got, like London have had for many years, a sort of virtuous circle: low fares, high usage, more money to go back in to keep and you've got to get yourself to that position, which we're getting there now, and I'm absolutely confident Steve will get there too.
There's an academic audience, and I'm sure that there's economists in the audience, and they'll tell you about the Laffer curve and the tipping point, and that's what happens when bus fares go too high. Actually, the fare box that Andy's talking about, the take, reduces, and that's just a nonsense. So that's why we want to grow things and make it more attractive. Plus, if you have a genuine quality alternative to jumping in the car, then you can reach your net zero carbon targets as well, and then we can save the planet.
I wanted to know, Head North was written and published before a Labour government. You've talked a lot about the relationship with Westminster and how really you say it's broken, that it doesn't work. Has there been an improvement since Labour came to power?
For me, it's been literally a breath of fresh air. We tried to get in to see the Chancellor at the time, which was Rishi Sunak, and he wouldn't speak to us. I think he did one Zoom call. And then when he was Prime Minister, he wouldn't even, and this is when we had more than one Tory in the mayoral group, and he wouldn't even address us, wouldn't speak to us. And then a new government comes in, and within 2 days of its first week, we're invited to Downing Street and sat around the cabinet and had an adult conversation about what we can do to help the government to achieve its missions. And that is by delivering on, say, the housing targets, which was mentioned before. 1.5 million homes need to be built. Well, who's going to build them, and how are they built? And what are the things that you need to enable those things to be built? And we sat round and had those conversations cross-party. And I think that demonstrates for me the serious nature that, one, this government wants to work across the political divide, but two, that they recognise that metro mayors and devolution are the way in which we can become the delivery arm of national government.
There's definitely been a big change. We're just talking to them much more. Tomorrow, for instance, there'll be an announcement about reform of the benefit system, and Greater Manchester will become a trailblazer around getting people into work, and I think Liverpool too. And that's recasting the whole way the system works, making it more supportive of people, more empowering, less computer says no, which has been the DWP system. So that is a big deal, and look out for that one tomorrow. An English devolution bill is coming, but I'm going to come to a but, because there is a but. We haven't got that commitment yet to a Liverpool-Manchester railway or to, new lines north of Birmingham. Some of the big things, the big ticket items that affect the north, we're still working on. And so, we would and will challenge them. If place first is to mean anything, you've got to be prepared to call out your own side as much as you did the last government. Because in the end, you've got to be a champion for the place, haven't you? Whoever's in it, even if it's inconvenient. And we will do that. Obviously we're working with them. We're, pushing them as hard as we can. They've got a difficult inheritance. But, we will want to see at the end of this Parliament tangible commitments to correct some of the unfairnesses in terms of infrastructure across the country, in particularly in what we're getting in the north. And then will come a time where we'll have to perhaps, call them out more directly. But hopefully we'll have persuaded them before that happens.
But if our Prime Minister can say country first and politics second, we can say place first and politics second. And that's what we've said from day one. So there's no difference, really. If we call things out because they're wrong for our area, all we're doing is exactly the same as the government will do if it's being offered deals internationally and they're not right for the UK.
I'm conscious of the time now. We have reached the end of this evening's time. You talked about the importance of championing the places that you represent. I think everybody here tonight would thank you for doing that for the Hillsborough families. You talk in the book about decency and dignity, and I think people would thank Lord Heseltine for bringing that to Liverpool City region, not just, you've talked about it in relation to the Hillsborough families and bringing that behaviour and want to Westminster. So we wish you well with Head North. We're all going to hold you to a few things, I think. Definitely connectivity across the north is key, and connection with the people that you represent is a must if your roles are to grow and to deliver. So I want to thank everybody for coming this evening. I hope you enjoyed what you heard here, and thanks to Andy Burnham for making that journey from Manchester to Liverpool. I hope we've made you feel very welcome.
Very much, always.
And Steve Rotherham, thank you for your time this evening.
Thanks, Marie.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I was just going to say, thank you all for coming. It's great for us, isn't it, to see a full room like this, and to you, Mairead. But again, we just want to say, I don't think we'd be on this stage were it not for Lord Heseltine, for John Prescott, for others who've made this argument before us. And I just want to say that tonight before we finish. You know, I think this country is finally going to break out of its London-centric sort of mindset because of what has been done here, the foundations that have been laid. And Steve and I would say to any younger people in the room, you know, please do pick up this mantle and never let it go backwards. But you know, we're conscious that we wouldn't be here were it not for what Michael and others did. I was in Manchester not long ago for Sir Richard Lees's leaving do. Just to make the point that it wasn't just Liverpool that Michael helped. And we were at GMEX, you know, the old, GMEX, and now Manchester Central, you know where it is. Michael nudged me and he said, tell me something. He said, is there an old railway station around here anywhere? I said, Michael, you're in it. He said, oh, I wondered what happened to that. Because at that time, I think a lot of decisions were being taken to protect things for the north of England and to give it a chance of the regeneration that we've seen. So it wasn't just Liverpool that benefited from your work, Michael. Manchester benefited too. Hopefully the whole of the Northwest is benefiting now. But for closing, just wanted, I think on behalf of both of us, to say thank you. And don't listen to him, hands off my job. Get in there and challenge him, and that'll make life interesting. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.